The autumn of 1883 came early to the Bitterroot Valley, and it came mean. Elias Cutter felt that meanness in his knuckles before the sun had fully risen, the cold settling deep into the joints, the way cold always did after a man had spent too many years gripping a plow handle with nothing but weather between him and the sky. He stood on the porch of the house he had built, board by board, and looked out at the fields where the last of the hay stood in pale rows, and he thought about the letter sitting on the table inside. He had read it twice. He was not a man given to reading things twice, but that letter had earned it. A woman from Bozeman had answered his advertisement in the territorial paper. The advertisement had been small and plain. He was not a man for flourish. It had said, "Widower, 36, honest, hard-working, seeks woman capable of cooking, keeping house, and caring for a child of 4 years. Wages or arrangement negotiable. No prettiness required." He had almost not sent it. His neighbor Aldous Frey had told him to send it, and Elias had done it mostly to stop Aldous from talking about it. But the letter had come. The woman's name was Grace Hadley. She was 28, she wrote, and she was not writing for a husband. She was writing because the advertisement had said wages or arrangement negotiable, and she needed wages. She had been a school teacher in Bozeman. The school had closed when the town's funding collapsed. She had no family left in Montana. She could cook. She could keep a house. She wrote in a hand that was careful and even, and she did not waste words. He respected that without admitting it to himself. He folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket and went inside to where his daughter was still asleep. Clara, 4 years old and already the ruling force of everything Elias owned or intended to own. He stood in the doorway of her room and looked at her dark curls spread across the pillow, and he felt the familiar ache of a man who loves something so completely it frightens him. He went back to the kitchen and put the coffee pot on. He had already decided. He wrote back that same evening. He told Grace Hadley the terms plainly. She would cook the morning and evening meals. She would keep the house clean and orderly. She would see to the child during the hours he was in the fields, which were most of the daylight hours from March through October, and fewer in winter. He could offer her a room, the small one off the kitchen that had been his late wife's sewing room, and a wage of $4 a month, which was not generous but was honest, given what the farm was earning. He told her there was a town 12 miles south called Harlan's Fork, with a church and a general store and a schoolhouse that might need a teacher come spring, if she was interested in such things. He told her the child's name was Clara and that she was 4 years old and stubborn and good-hearted, and that she had not had a woman's steady care since her mother passed 2 winters ago. He told Grace she should know that going in. He sent the letter on a Thursday. Grace Hadley's reply came back inside of 10 days, which was fast for the territory. She accepted the terms. She would arrive by the 3rd week of October on the train to Missoula and could find conveyance south from there if he could not meet her. He wrote back that he would meet her. That was the whole of their courtship, if you could call it that. 2 letters apiece and a date on a calendar. Elias did not tell Clara about Grace until the week before she was to arrive. He did not know how to tell a 4-year-old that a stranger was coming to cook her meals and mind her days, so he said it plainly, the way he said most things. He told Clara that a woman named Grace was coming to help with the house. Clara considered this with the seriousness that she brought to most subjects. Then she asked if Grace would read to her at night. Elias said he did not know. Clara said that her mama used to read to her at night. Elias said he knew that. Clara looked at him with her mother's dark eyes and said that someone ought to. He did not argue with that. He could not. He drove the wagon to Missoula on a Tuesday morning when the sky was the color of an old tin cup and the wind was already carrying the first real bite of the coming winter. The train platform was not crowded. 3 families, a pair of miners, a preacher in a dusty coat. He stood at the edge of the platform with his hat in his hands, because he had not thought to wear it on his head, and now the wind was pulling at his hair, and he felt thoroughly unprepared for the whole undertaking. He had described himself in his first letter. Tall, dark-haired, probably needing a haircut. He saw her before she saw him. She came off the train carrying a carpet bag in each hand, and she was looking around the platform with an expression that was not lost or afraid but was simply assessing, the way a person looks at a job that needs doing and is deciding where to start. She was slight, a little below medium height, with brown hair pinned up under a gray traveling hat. Her coat was good wool but well worn. When her eyes found him, she walked directly toward him without any hesitation. He liked that about her in the first 10 seconds. She stopped 2 feet away and put one carpet bag down and held out her hand like a man would. He shook it. She had a firm grip. She said, "Mr. Cutter." He said, "Miss Hadley." She looked at him steadily and said, "The terms in your letter were clear enough. I want you to know I'm not here under any misapprehension about what this arrangement is." He said, "Neither am I." She nodded. She picked her carpet bag back up. She said, "Then let's get started." The drive south took better than 2 hours on a road that was more intention than fact, and they talked very little. He told her about the farm, 80 acres under cultivation, 30 more in timber, a kitchen garden that had done well this year, a cow, 6 chickens, and a good horse named Barlow. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked 2 questions. She asked whether the stove was wood or coal. He said wood. She asked whether Clara had any particular fears he ought to know about. Storms, the dark, loud noises. He looked at her sideways. He said Clara was not much afraid of anything except sudden loud noises, and that thunderstorms sometimes made her cry, but she settled quickly if someone sat with her. Grace nodded and did not say anything more about it, but she filed it. He could tell. She was the kind of woman who filed things. When they came up the long drive to the house, the afternoon light was going thin and gold, and Clara was on the porch, wrapped in Elias's old work coat, which came down past her knees. She had been watching for them. Elias had known she would be watching. She watched for everything from that porch. Clara studied Grace from the porch steps with the solemn attention of a very small judge. Grace climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help, and stood in the yard and looked back at Clara with equal seriousness. She did not talk down to the child or make the cooing sounds that some women made. She said, "You must be Clara." Clara said, "Yes." Grace said, "My name is Grace. I'm going to be helping your father with the house." Clara said, "Can you read?" Grace said, "I can." Clara said, "Will you read to me at bedtime?" Grace glanced at Elias. He looked at his boots. He had told her there would be a child, not that the child would immediately present terms of her own. Grace looked back at Clara and said, "I expect I can manage that." Clara seemed to find this satisfactory. She held open the door to the house in a proprietary way, and Grace walked in ahead of her. And that, Elias thought, was that. The kitchen was cold. He had let the fire go low while he was gone. Grace set her bags down in the small room off the kitchen without comment, hung her coat on the peg by the door, and had the fire stoked and a pot of something smelling of onion and dried beef on the stove inside of 20 minutes. Elias went to tend Barlow and the cow. When he came back in, Clara was sitting at the kitchen table telling Grace about a rabbit she had seen in the garden that morning, and Grace was listening with the same steady attention she had given his description of the farm, and something in Elias's chest moved in a way he did not want to examine. The first week settled them into a shape they had not negotiated, but fell into anyway, the way water finds the low places in a field and runs there without being told. Grace rose before Elias each morning and had coffee and oatmeal or cornbread ready by the time he came in from his first check of the animals. He ate standing at first, the way he always had since Margaret died, and Grace said nothing about it. She did not comment on his habits or try to reform them. She simply did her work. She kept Clara occupied through the mornings with small tasks, shelling dried beans, folding cloth, sorting buttons from a tin that Clara treated as a great treasure. and after the midday meal, she sat with the girl at the table and taught her letters. Elias found this out by accident, coming in early one afternoon for a tool he had forgotten. Clara was bent over a piece of paper, her tongue between her teeth, drawing careful shapes while Grace guided her hand. Grace looked up when he came in with no particular expression, not guilty, not proud, simply present. He got his tool and went back out. That evening at supper, Clara showed him the letters she had made. CLARA, uneven and large and real. He looked at them a long time. He said they were fine letters. Clara said Grace had showed her how. He looked across the table at Grace, who was cutting a piece of bread and not looking at him, and he said thank you, and she said it was nothing, and it was not nothing at all. He began sitting down to eat on the third day. He did not announce this change or explain it. He simply sat. Grace did not acknowledge it either, but he caught the slight settling of her shoulders, the way a person relaxes when something that was wrong has been made right. The house was warmer than it had been in 2 years. Not just from the fire, though Grace kept a better fire than he had. It was the smell of things cooking, the sound of Clara's voice filling the rooms, the sight of mended curtains where he had not noticed the curtains were torn. He noticed all of it the way a man notices things he had stopped expecting to have. One evening in the second week he came in from repairing the fence line at the east pasture and found Grace sitting at Clara's bedside with a thin book of stories open on her knee, reading aloud in a low and steady voice. Clara was nearly asleep. Grace's voice did not change when she heard him in the doorway. She finished the page and closed the book quietly and tucked the blanket under Clara's chin with a practiced gentleness, and Elias stood in the hallway for a moment after she came out, before he remembered to step back so she could pass. She said good night and went to her room. He stood in the hallway and thought about the rabbit-hole depth of the thing he was carefully not thinking about. The external trouble came with November. Elias had been expecting it the way a man expects weather, not with certainty about the day, but with certainty about the coming. The Dunmore Land and Grazing Company had been buying up parcels in the valley for 2 years, mostly from families who had run low on hope before they ran low on land. Their man was a lawyer named Price, who wore a good hat and arrived at inconvenient times. He arrived at Elias's farm on a gray Wednesday morning when Grace was in the yard beating a rug, and Elias was splitting wood by the barn. Price drove up in a hired rig and got down with the ease of a man who does not do his own physical work, and introduced himself pleasantly. He said the company was prepared to offer Elias a fair price for his acreage. He named the price. It was not fair. It was the kind of price a man offers when he believes the other man has no options. Elias set his axe in the block and looked at Price without expression. He said the land was not for sale. Price smiled and said that all land was for sale at the right time, and that perhaps Mr. Cutter ought to consider his circumstances, a man alone with a small child and the winter coming, working ground that the company might eventually acquire anyway through tax liens if the harvest had not been what it should. Elias said the harvest had been adequate. Price said that was good to hear, and left his card and climbed back into his rig. He was not threatening in any direct way that could be answered. That was the most precise kind of threat. That evening, Elias told Grace about Price while Clara was asleep. He told her because she was in the house and it concerned the house, and also because he found he could talk to her in the plain way he talked to himself, without having to arrange the words into something softer. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "He mentioned tax liens." Elias said he had. She said, "Is there a lien?" He said, "There had been, the previous year, a small one from a bad season. He had paid it." She said, "Do you have the receipt?" He said, he was almost certain he did. She said, "Find it." Her tone was not sharp. It was the tone of someone who has taught children and knows that certainty and calm get further than noise. He found the receipt the next morning in the wooden box where he kept papers. He showed it to her. She told him to keep it close and to speak to whoever handled such records in Harlan's Fork, and to let them know there had been company interest in his land. She said paper was a man's best armor when other men had lawyers. He had not thought of it in those terms, but he could see she was right. He rode into Harlan's Fork the following Friday, and the county clerk, a stout woman named Mrs. Opal Ferris, who had no patience for land companies, made sure his clear title was properly recorded, and remarked loudly in the hearing of two other men in the office that the Dunmore Company had been making the same moves on 3 other parcels, and that the territorial paper had been asked to look into it. Elias rode home feeling something he had not felt about the farm in 2 years, like it would still be his in the spring. December came in with a blizzard that shut the world down for 9 days. They were not unprepared. Elias had laid in wood and provisions, and he knew his animals and his land. But 9 days inside a small house is 9 days, and the world becomes the size of whatever you can see from your windows. Clara did not mind. Clara had Grace. They played every game that could be played with a deck of cards and 3 buttons and a length of string. Grace told stories from memory, stories she had read, stories she invented, stories about a little girl who lived in a house where it snowed so deeply that the drifts reached the windowsills, and the family had to dig tunnels to reach the barn, which Clara found both terrifying and delightful. Elias worked at the table in the evenings mending harness and sharpening tools, and listened to Grace's voice and Clara's laughter, and felt something he was no longer able to name as anything other than what it was. On the 5th night of the storm, Grace had fallen quiet after Clara went to sleep, and she sat across the table from Elias with her mending while the wind made its long complaints against the walls. He had been watching the candle flame. He said, without planning to say it, "You don't have to stay." She looked up. He said, "After the winter, when the roads open, if you wanted to go to Harlan's Fork and teach, I'd give you a good letter. What you've done here." He stopped. She was looking at him steadily. He said, "It's more than the contract asked." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The contract asked me to cook and clean." She set her mending down. She said, "Clara asked me for bedtime stories." He said, "Clara's 4." Grace said, she knew what she needed. She picked her mending back up. She said, "I'm not unhappy here, Elias." It was the first time she had used his given name. He became very interested in the harness buckle he was working on. He said, "All right," she said, "all right." The wind kept at the walls, and they sat in the warmth of the stove and the candle, and the silence between them was not empty anymore. It was full of the things both of them were allowing themselves to begin to want. When the thaw came in March, it came slowly, and then all at once, the way grief releases, gradual, and then suddenly, a flood of everything green and new. Clara turned 5 in the last week of February, and Grace had made her a cake with dried apple and honey, because the sugar was low, and Clara had declared it the finest cake she had ever eaten, with the authority of a person who does not feel the need to qualify their opinions. The Dunmore Company's man Price did not come back. Word had reached them through Aldous Frey that the territorial paper had run its story and that 2 of the company's filings had been challenged in court. The land pressure had shifted elsewhere for now. Elias knew it might not be permanent. He also knew that with his title clear and his paperwork sound and a county clerk like Opal Ferris in his corner, he was better positioned than he had been. On an afternoon in late March, when the mud was everywhere and the light was longer, and the meadowlark had come back to the fence posts, Elias found Grace in the kitchen garden, turning the first soil of the year with a spade she had apparently sharpened herself, because it was sharper than he kept it. He leaned on the fence and watched her. She looked up. He said, "I've been thinking." She said, "About what?" He said, "About whether what we have here ought to be made more permanent." She looked at him without alarm and without coyness. She said, "You'd better say what you mean plainly." He said, I mean, I'd like you to stay, not as a hired hand, as my wife, if you'd have me. Clara needs you, and—" He stopped. He tried again. "I need you, not for the cooking." She was quiet. She put the spade in the ground and straightened up and looked at him with the same level attention she had given everything since the train platform, and he let her look, because he had nothing to hide from it. She said, "I came here for wages." He said, "I know it." She said, "But I've been here for Clara for 3 months, and for you for longer than I want to say." He said, "I won't rush you." She said, "You're not rushing me. I'm telling you yes." He opened the gate and came into the garden. He was not a man for speeches or for gestures. He took her hand the way she had offered hers to him on the train platform. Directly, firmly, she held on. They stood in the soft mud of the first spring earth and held on to each other, and above them, the meadowlark did not stop singing for any of it. They were married in April by the preacher at Harlan's Fork, a lean and cheerful man named Reverend Stokes, who had apparently heard of Elias from Opal Ferris, and gave the whole thing his most sincere blessing. Clara wore a yellow ribbon Grace had ordered from the general store in November, when she had already decided something and not yet said it. The ribbon had been in Grace's trunk waiting through the whole winter. Clara wore it in her hair and considered herself the most decorated person in the church, which was probably true. The home that Grace Hadley made and Elias Cutter built was not the product of a fine beginning. No one would have told that story in November, 2 strangers on a wagon seat in the cold with a plain contract between them. But a contract is only the door. What comes in through the door, the warmth, the voices, the light, the steady presence of someone who stays, that is what makes a home. The child knew it first, the way children always do. Clara asked for a bedtime story before Grace had even put her bags away, and in that small and stubborn request was the whole wisdom of the thing. We tell each other what we need, if we are brave enough and young enough not to dress it in anything but plainness. Grace stayed because Clara asked. Elias asked because the winter taught him what warmth was worth, and the farm, which had been a plot of ground and a grief, became a place. You never know, friend, where belonging is waiting for you. Sometimes it comes on a train in a gray wool coat, with a carpet bag in each hand, and it looks you in the eye and shakes your hand and says, "Let's get started." There is no better thing in this world than a person who stays and means it. If this story stirred something in your heart tonight, leave us a word in the comments. Tell us, have you ever made a bargain that turned into something you never expected to need? We'd love to know. And if you'd like more stories from the old frontier, where good people found each other in hard places, subscribe and come back. We'll have another journey waiting for you. Good night. God bless you and yours, wherever home finds you.